Welcome to Global Connections with Robert Siegel, Navigating the New Normal, presented by the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center. Our monthly Leaders Forum addresses vital issues facing society and the economy, real estate and technology, medicine and science. My name is Dr. Joshua Plout. I'm the Executive Director of American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, AFRMC, a 501c3 National American charitable organization based in New York City. We at AFRMC represent Israel's premier hospital, Rabin Medical Center in Petah Tikva in Greater Tel Aviv, the leading institution named in honor of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. The hospital is a model of coexistence. It serves 1 million patients annually from all ethnic and religious backgrounds with the same compassionate care. We would like to share an overview of the work being done at the Rabin Medical Center.
Rabin Medical Center, located nearby Tel Aviv, is one of Israel's largest and most advanced academic hospitals, named after former Israeli Prime Minister and Nobel Prize winner for Peace Yitzhak Rabin. Comprising Bellinson and Hasharon campuses, it has been a national leader in medicine, science, and compassion towards patients since its founding in 1936. As the flagship hospital of Israel's largest healthcare provider, Clalit, with more than 8,200 dedicated staff members, RMC gives treatment to around 1 million patients every year, performs more than 70% of all organ transplants, and provides health care to every 6th cancer patient in the country. RMC is a home for internationally acclaimed centers of excellence, including Davidoff Cancer Center, Samueli Institute for Cancer Research, and a new brain and heart center, the Tower of Hope. Through groundbreaking research, AI-driven medicine, cutting-edge technologies, and global collaborations, RMC is redefining what is possible in modern healthcare. In moments of peace and in times of war, we stand on the front line. As a main trauma center, RMC is healing soldiers and civilians, reuniting families, and strengthening the Israeli social fabric and resilience. Delivering not only world-class treatment, but also human connection, healing, and hope. Rabin Medical Center, a beacon of innovation, excellence, and care.
Our host and moderator for Global Connections is Robert Siegel, former host of All Things Considered on National Public Radio for 31 years. Over the course of an hour each month, Global Connections features guests who Robert Siegel interviews as they explore important issues in our world. And now, on to today's program. Today's Global Connections topic is, what's next in Israel and the Middle East in 2026? Thank you to our very special guests, Ghaith Al-Omari, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and Ambassador Dennis Ross, the William Davidson Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And now, Global Connections with Robert Siegel.
Thank you, Josh. We're talking today about the year ahead in our dealings with Israel and the Middle East, and there's much to talk about. Will President Trump's 20-point plan for Gaza take hold? Will other countries in the region take part in enforcing it? Will Israel's war with Iran, or for that matter, the U.S. war with Iran, is it over or might it continue? Is the Lebanese Shiite movement Hezbollah still a threat to Israel? And more broadly, what does the U.S. want to see? What are its interests in the Middle East these days? It's a complicated region of the world, and we have some very experienced and insightful panelists on hand to try to explain it a bit today. They're not just veteran observers of the region, they are also past participants in the efforts to negotiate a Middle East peace. I'll interview each of the panelists, and then we'll have a question and answer and discussion period. If you're joining our discussion live, you can contribute to that by submitting a question using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Our first panelist, Ambassador Dennis Ross, can only join us for the first part of our panel discussion. Ambassador Ross is a distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He served both Democratic and Republican administrations in the White House and at the State Department, trying to advance the prospects of peace in the Middle East. These days, he is a professor at the Center for Jewish Civilization at Georgetown University and author most recently of the book Statecraft 2.0, What America Needs to Lead, What America Needs to Lead in a Multipolar World. Ambassador Ross, Dennis, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
Let's start with this opening question. When you think ahead to the coming months, the coming year in the Middle East, what is different and new? What is familiar and old?
I wish I could say there was an awful lot that was new and there was very little that's familiar and old. Unfortunately, I see a lot of what's familiar and old and not as much that's familiar and new. Now, having said that, let me say what I do think is new. One, I think there is an Arab interest in playing a role in resolving the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians that we've never really seen before. What I mean by that is that Arabs have always said that they want to see peace, but they've never been prepared to assume any responsibility for producing it. It was always up to the United States to produce it, or it was up to the Israelis to make the concessions. There was never a sense of Arab responsibility that they should create an aura of legitimacy for Palestinian concessions, or they should impress upon Palestinians to make certain kinds of moves, or they should backstop the Palestinians. In a sense, the role that they could play in some ways is similar to the role that we play with the Israelis. The fact is they've never been prepared to assume that role. I see indications that they are much more prepared to do that than in the past. I don't want to exaggerate it. They're not about to rush in and assume all these responsibilities. But what's different is there was a perception in the past that they could use the conflict, but they would never have to resolve it. Using the conflict could be useful for political reasons or deflection reasons. They could use the conflict to try to keep the Americans not focused on their internal situation, but dealing with trying to resolve the conflict. Now you look at Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and others, and they feel after October 7th and its aftermath that they really can't ignore the conflict any longer. I cite as an interesting example, look at the joint statement that the Saudis produced with the French in July, which then became the basis for a General Assembly UN resolution. And many elements of it then found their ways into the Trump 20-point plan. You found for the first time after a year and 3/4, you saw a condemnation of Hamas for October 7th. Other than the UAE and Bahrain, no Arab leaders had been prepared to condemn that. Suddenly you have the whole Arab League condemning it. You saw a call for disarmament of Hamas. Again, hadn't happened prior to that. So here there was a kind of interesting crossing of a threshold. Now we're seeing it somewhat in the issue of international stabilization force. I say somewhat because there's a readiness to participate in the force, although there's not a readiness to go in and physically disarm Hamas. Nonetheless, I still see this as a move in a direction that we haven't seen before. It is a new element. There is a potential, I think, to use it over time. That's new and promising.
You mentioned some familiar Arab states when we talk about optimism. UAE has been in the forefront, and of course we've all been watching the Saudis come close to or consider or talk about how they might at some point normalize relations with Israel. The old Arab powers, Egypt, what's left of Syria, are they in there as well?
Egypt is clearly playing a kind of mediating role, although it seems to be focused much more on negotiating an understanding with Hamas as opposed to trying to impose anything on Hamas. Syria is something that's profoundly different. We had a regime that existed since 1971 between father and son of the Assads. It's gone. It's been replaced by an interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, who was the head, who at one point was part of Al-Qaeda, at one point was dealing with ISIS, broke from it. But HTS, the group that he headed, was a Sunni Islamist group, a fundamentalist group. And now he's the interim president of Syria. He has had meetings in the White House. No Syrian president has had a meeting in the White House ever until Ahmed al-Shara came and had that meeting. President Trump is sending him a note in which he says, "You're a great leader. We'll do great things together." That would have been unimaginable even a year ago when he assumed power, his group assumed power. So that is something new. Unfortunately, right now, we see some discussion of having talks between Syria and Israel, and they've actually had some. But we also saw the Israelis feeling the need to where there was a number of killings on the Syrian side, a number of wounded on the Israeli side. And the point is, a lot of that looks familiar, but there is some potential for change simply because of the U.S. relationship with Shar, but also President Trump's relationship with Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu really can't say no to President Trump, and we're seeing it again right after the Israeli raid. We see the president coming out on Truth Social and making it clear he wasn't happy with that. And then there's a phone call with Netanyahu. So there are elements that are new and different. Yeah. Sometimes they seem to reflect a lot of what we've seen in the past.
Speaking of new things, you wrote recently, no American administration has ever publicly embraced self-determination. This is for the Palestinians. But President Trump has now done so. You mean in his 20-point plan?
Yes. Point 19 says explicitly that if the Palestinian Authority faithfully carries out reform, that could create the conditions for a pathway to self-determination and statehood for Palestinians, which addresses Palestinian aspirations. We have had a position not to adopt recognition of self-determination. I should say, just to be historically accurate, there was one administration, George W. Bush, in August of 2001, 3 weeks before 9/11, in response to a message from the then Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Abdullah, that they might reassess our whole relationship if we didn't do more to stop what was now what was happening in the Israeli responses and what was the Second Intifada. And President Bush and the people around him were sufficiently concerned that they sent a secret letter to him in which they said we would support self-determination for Palestinians. He never said it publicly. He said we would support statehood, but he never said it publicly. No other administration has said it. I think it's an important threshold to cross because the Palestinians are a people, and as a people have a right to self-determination, but that right also has to be coupled with responsibilities. If you're talking about Palestinian statehood, it can't have independent militias. If you're talking about Palestinian statehood, it can't have an alliance with rejectionists or with Iran. If you're talking about Palestinian statehood, there obviously can't be a division between the West Bank and Gaza. If you're talking about Palestinian statehood, it can't be built on a framework or a bedrock of corruption. So self-determination is an important threshold crosser. It's something that we hadn't recognized before. It's something that I think is actually a good development, especially if it's tied to a set of responsibilities.
At this point, is it clear to you who the Palestinians would be who would speak for the Palestinians? That is, we know that Israel and many countries have serious problems with Hamas speaking for the Palestinians, and the Palestinian Authority seems to be virtually dysfunctional. Who then are the Palestinian leaders?
The only acknowledged Palestinian leader, at least internationally, is Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas.
The head of the Palestinian Authority.
The Palestinian Authority. Is he capable of making peace with the Israelis? He speaks in terms of slogans. He doesn't speak in terms of a serious approach. He lacks the kind of legitimacy now that would be required. You really don't have a Palestinian leader who is capable of making historic decisions, because historic decisions also require concessions and compromise that need to be legitimized in a Palestinian context. So you don't really have that at this point. You will certainly need a new leadership. I think it's fair to say you need new leaders among the Palestinians. You probably need new leaders among the Israelis.
You, speaking of leaders of the Israelis, you told me a story about a conversation you had with Yitzhak Rabin when he was prime minister and about 6 months away from an election that resulted ultimately in Bibi Netanyahu becoming prime minister. But he asked you 6 months out before obviously he was assassinated before the election, but he asked you who was going to be the next prime minister of Israel. You told me you got it wrong.
I did get it wrong.
So I'll give you a chance to get it right this time. Who's going to be the next prime minister of Israel?
I suspect I would be as wrong now as I was wrong then. Look, I do believe we will have a different Israeli government after the election. That doesn't necessarily mean there'll be a different Israeli prime minister. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu's strategy is to create a blocking coalition to ensure that the opposition can't get to 61 in terms of the Jewish opposition parties.
This is 61 seats out of 120 in the Knesset.
Correct. I think as long as Prime Minister Netanyahu can ensure the opposition doesn't get to 61, they won't be able to form a government without him. He won't be able to form a government without them. And he might say to them, all right, you boycotted me before and you got Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. You willing to go along with that again? And you willing to, or you want to hold out and have another election? I wouldn't be shocked if that was the outcome, but I also wouldn't be shocked if we ended up seeing the opposition get to 61. Right now, I think it's an unknown. We'll have an election by October of next year. Whether we have one before, I think remains, questionable. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu still puts a premium on preserving his coalition and his government. If the legislation that's designed to produce a burden sharing within Israel, meaning that the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, will also have to serve in the military, if that legislation as currently drafted is adopted, that will keep this government intact because the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, will come back and support it. If that legislation is not adopted, then we'll probably have an election sooner.
Well, Ambassador Dennis Ross, I'm sorry that you can't stay with us for the balance of the hour, but thank you very much for spending this much time with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Our next panelist, Ghaith Al-Omari, is a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Ghaith held various positions within the Palestinian Authority and in the peace negotiations led by Bill Clinton at the end of his presidency. Ghaith advised the Palestinian delegation during those talks. He also used to be executive director of the American Task Force on Palestine, advocating for a two-state solution. Ghaith Al-Omari, first of all, thanks for joining us again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
When you think about the coming year in the Middle East, what strikes you as most significantly changed or different about things? And as we're now, I think, at the end of the Gaza war, and I think at the end of the war with Iran, or at least in a pause in the war with Iran.
I mean, look, the most obvious different things is what's happening in the United States. I think we have a president, President Trump, who is acting in ways that, frankly, were very unexpected. I mean, an exercise of American power in the region that I have not seen for many years, and it's producing results, whether it's the ceasefire in Gaza, whether it's developments in Iran, but also a degree of unpredictability. So, the president was very focused on getting a deal in Gaza, and he got a deal in Gaza. The question that I hear from every official in the region, Arab or Israeli, is will he remain focused on this, or will now, something else take his attention, be it Russia, Ukraine, whatever it is. So the American factor, both the kind of exercise of American power, but also the unpredictability of the United States. And then I think the region itself, and this remains to be seen, how will it internalize the end of the Gaza war? I think the Gaza war shaped and reshaped Arab public opinion to one end. Now the war is over. How this is going to settle, and how will different Arab governments deal with their own internal shifts as they look at kind of how they move forward, whether in terms of future relations with Israel, whether in terms of regional alliances, whether in terms of how they deal with Iran. So I think a lot of internal turmoil, but also interesting openings and risks in diplomacy.
The Gaza war was really felt on both sides as a catastrophic event. Do you think it's something like the famous catastrophe Palestinians remember, and the dispersion with the creation of the State of Israel? Is it something that is likely to be that enduring in the worldview of people in the region?
Actually, that's a very difficult question. It's a very difficult question because we're talking about a social phenomenon that we just don't know how it's going to play out. I can tell you in the Palestinian discourse right now, this is being referred to as the second Nakba. And I have to say that I think the Palestinians, by the way, just like the Israelis, have not even yet had a chance to internalize what happened over the last 2 years. I mean, I see now with almost the release of almost all of the hostages, we have one remaining body of a hostage in Israel. Only now are the Israelis starting to internalize what happened. And I think the Palestinians are going to go through the same. How this is going to play out, no one knows. But if I look at the wider Arab region, certainly there was a shift. I mean, many would remember before the October 7th, there were talks about normalization with Saudi Arabia, in which the Palestinian issue was maybe a footnote. The Abraham Accords, with the exception of the United Arab Emirates, that even mentioned the Palestinians. During the last 2 years, the Palestinian issue became front and center of Arab public discourse. And I think right now, Arab governments are waiting to see how this is going to settle. Certainly, we're not going to go back to a situation where the Palestinians don't matter. That's, again, every conversation I have with Arab officials, particularly younger ones, this is certainly on their talking points, on their agenda. But I do believe also they understand that it cannot remain kind of as the sole issue. And they're starting right now to look into how they will go back to their old priorities. So how this is going to settle is something that I think will be quite interesting.
You've mentioned Saudi Arabia. When the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, visited Washington, I think many in the Washington press corps were critical of the uncritical embrace of him by the administration because of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who was living in the United States. I hear people like you saying, yeah, that may be true, but also you should see what this guy's doing in Saudi Arabia. So to give us an appropriate sense of what's happening, how much is Mohammed bin Salman changing Saudi Arabia these days?
I mean, first of all, I have to start by saying something like the killing of Khashoggi, who is someone that I knew, I'm sure you knew, all of us here knew. That's not something you will ever forgive and will never forget. That was brutal, and that's but on the other hand, you go to Saudi Arabia today, I mean, it's unrecognizable. It's unrecognizable, maybe on surface level. You go, you see women not only driving, but actually Saudi today has one of the highest levels of women in middle management, both in the private and public sector. You see a change in the religious discourse and the cultural discourse that is quite key. I mean, last time I was in Saudi, I was invited to the opening night of the first Arabic language Saudi opera. At a country where the music was banned. And this has implications not only for Saudi Arabia. I mean, I'm a product of growing up in the Middle East in the 70s and 80s in Jordan, where the Saudi brand of Islam, Wahhabist Islam, really killed the much more tolerant, much more pluralistic versions of Islam that my parents and grandparents lived with. Today, Saudi is at the forefront of combating the same problem that, granted, they created, but now they are producing something very different. one of the few countries, actually, it's the leading country right now in the Arab world that talks about interfaith dialogue. The religious authorities talk about the need for Muslims in the West to respect the laws and the customs of the countries they live in, etc. So I think what's happening is transformational for Saudi itself, but also for the larger, wider Arab, and I would even dare say the Muslim discourse. It's not something we can just ignore, because if we ignore it, then we are missing being part and being able to shape what I think is one of the most transformational dynamics that we've seen in the regions, at least since the 1970s.
One area where there isn't progress is on the constitutional front. And how does, say, a generation of Saudis, like other Arabs in the region, their reaction to the war in Gaza, how does that affect the decisions of the ruler?
I mean, I think a mistake that many of us make is when we think of a monarchy or a non-democracy to think that, oh, the king just says jump and people say how high. No. Often, actually, these kind of countries have to be even more attentive to their public opinion than democracies, because they don't have these tools for correctives. I know for a fact, and many do, that the Saudis probably have more intelligence agencies that keep a tab on public opinion than certainly any democracy that I know. All of this to say that something like normalization with Israel, things of this sort, the Saudis are looking at their public, and their public today is just not ready. Again, in a recent trip I made to Saudi Arabia, I was talking to this young woman, poster child really of what MBS is trying to do, articulate, successful, etc., etc. And she was telling me that, the Palestinian issue before the Gaza war was her parents' issue. Today, it's her issue. And I think until the Arab public, the Saudi public, internalizes, digests, comes to peace with what happened with Israel, with the Gaza war, until they start seeing changes and some, at least, prospect for moving away from the results, from at least rehabilitating and recovering from the results of the war, I just don't see Saudi getting there. Not to say that they don't want to get there. I think MBS said it very openly, I think, in the last trip. But I think his public is not ready yet, and I don't think he's willing to do a showdown with his own public on this issue.
Ghaith Al-Omari, thanks for joining us for this hour, and stay with us because we want you back for the discussion period shortly. First, though, we're going to hear from our third panelist, Aaron David Miller, who is Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Aaron David Miller is a former State Department Middle East analyst, negotiator, advisor. He served in several administrations, both Democratic and Republican, and he is always an interesting voice on this subject as well as many others. Aaron?
Robert, it's great to be here with you. I'll have to get a photograph that was taken after I was in high school.
Well, now we have the real you on.
Exactly.
So I've been starting off with this notion of what's different. What strikes you as we look ahead to 2026 as something about the region or U.S. policy on the region that just wasn't there before?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you ask me what is the most significant development, the one that will probably endure for good or ill, depending on how it's used, the fancy term for it is escalation dominance. The State of Israel has what it has never had in its 77 years, and that is the capacity to control the pace, the focus, the intensity of its military activities with all of its adversaries, with Hamas, with Hezbollah, to some extent with the Houthis and with Iran. Israel can escalate when it wants at a time of its choosing, and it can block the escalation of its adversaries. This is an extraordinary asset. I would argue that military power is a means to an end, and in the hands of an Israeli prime minister who had a strategy and was committed to turning that military power into more durable political arrangements, it could be a tremendous asset. That's the biggest change in the region by far, in my judgment. In the U.S., I think it's a dysfunctional presidency. A president, I voted for Republicans and Democrats and worked for them. we have a president who fundamentally took an oath to preserve the Constitution, which he is on a daily basis undermining in its norms and institutions. But at the same time, you have a president who has done what none of the presidents I ever worked for, Jimmy Carter to Bush 43, has ever done. And that is to talk to an Israeli prime minister in ways that created a compelling sense on the part of that prime minister that he had no choice but to comply. President Trump reportedly said to Benjamin Netanyahu in that consequential weekend, if you cannot accept this plan, the 20-point plan, we will walk away from you. And as my friend and colleague Dennis said on this broadcast, Benjamin Netanyahu cannot say no to Donald Trump. The question is whether or not Trump, as a transactional, situational president looking for short-term wins and gains, has the interest and the focus to continue to ply the waters of Israeli-Palestinian and Arab-Israeli peacemaking. I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah. When we spoke the other day, you described President Trump's actions amounting to really big-footing Israeli politics and the Israeli prime minister. And what I'm curious about is, do you think that the Trump's doing that reflects some change in his circumstances or the circumstances of Israel, or just Trump's attitude? That is, could any president have done what Donald Trump did, or would they be politically inhibited from doing so? Or
well, the answer, in my view, Robert, is, and this is my own analysis, is that Trump has freed himself from the two sets of constraints that have governed the way most American presidents and politicians have dealt with Israel. Number one, this is not Bill Clinton, who writes in his memoirs, he loved Rabin as he had loved no other man. I saw Clinton grieve up close and personal in the wake of Rabin's murder, and it's useful to point out this is the Rabin Medical Center. It's the 30th anniversary, November 4th, last month, of Rabin's murder. Second, Trump has no emotional commitment here. He may self-style himself the most pro-Israeli president in history, but unlike Clinton or Biden, I don't think Donald Trump is in love, quote unquote, and I use the word willfully, with the security, the idea, the people of Israel in the way Clinton and Biden were in love with it. Second, I think Trump has room to maneuver politically that no other American president has ever had. He owns the Republican Party. Yes, there are MAGA outliers, but there's very little resistance to pressuring Israel from his own party, and Democrats, mainstream Democrats, let alone the progressives, who want to impose serious costs and consequences on Israel in terms of conditioning military assistance. In fact, the three Chris's, Coons, Van Hollen, and Murphy, all of whom were mainstream Democrats, have all talked about conditioning or restricting military assistance to Israel. So Trump has a degree of maneuverability and freedom, and that's why, plus he likes to win. And Trump, frankly, in phase one, 20 hostages, the living hostages released. There was one exchange overnight of a Thai national, which leaves only one Israeli hostage deceased that Hamas is yet to return. And Trump has ended the war in Gaza as you and I have watched it. He has not ended the fighting necessarily. 300 Palestinians have been killed, the number of Israeli soldiers, since the ceasefire went into effect. But the war that we watched, tens of thousands of deployed Israeli soldiers, daily artillery and airstrikes, intelligence-driven operations, destruction of tunnels, daily exponential rise of Palestinian deaths and injuries, that war, in my view, is over. So Trump likes to win. But the wins are short term. And again, I don't know whether he has the patience or the focus or the desire now that the heavy lifting in Gaza and beyond is upon us.
I want you to talk a little bit about the the countries that are not part of an Arab-Israeli conflict in the region, that is Iran, which has its own war with Israel, or has had, and Turkey, for that matter, which is an
Yeah.
interesting country that I guess may or may not be part of the group enforcing the 20-point plan.
No, I mean, I would argue to you, if you asked me who are the most powerful countries in this region right now, it would be the three non-Arabs. You just named two of them, Turkey and Iran, and we've been talking about Israel. All have tremendous economic potential. All have militaries and intelligence organizations that are capable of projecting their power abroad for good or ill. One is a member of NATO. One is a non-NATO ally and America's closest ally. The other, Iran, is an outlier. I think you've seen the focus on Iran in the conversation. And Iran, however weakened, its proxies weakened, Iran is going to remain a big part of the conversation. Unfinished business. The Iranians are now re-upping their air defense systems and particularly their ballistic missile capacities, which the Israelis are very worried about. That Israeli 12-day war prevented Iran from producing 300 ICBMs every month. But the Iranian capacity is going to be rebuilt, and I would predict to you that 2026 could see another round. The Turks, member of NATO with considerable influence in the Middle East, playing a central role, probably the most important external power in Syria today, because of their support of pro-Sunni elements and their backing of the Ahmed Shara government, critically important. And the Turks, as you know, have volunteered their services in Gaza. They have influence with Hamas, clearly, as the Qataris do. The Israelis are worried, perhaps rightly, about a Turkish role, but the Turks could be very useful in reconstruction. Turks could be useful in demining. The Turks have skills, both in terms of disaster relief and reconstruction assistance. So Turkey could yet play a constructive role.
It was 30 years ago that Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, raising a question: how much does who the ruler is, the leader of the government, how much does it matter?
Well, I think it's everything.
Yep.
Not everything. Marx, not Groucho, the other one, wrote in the late 19th century that men make history, but rarely as they please. It's the interaction between human agency, Robert, and circumstance. Every time things that are good have happened in this region, it's because you had leaders who were masters of their politics, not prisoners of their ideologies. Leaders who were prepared to risk. Rabin paid for his life with his life. Sadat paid for his peace treaty with Israel with his life. I was at the last effort, as was Dennis, Camp David, 25 years ago. Arafat, Barak, and Clinton. I heard Arafat say at least 3 times during that summit that you will not get an opportunity to walk behind my coffin. So the notion that this is an existential challenge weighs heavily upon the leaders.
Aaron David Miller, thanks. Stick with us. Ghaith Omari, please rejoin us. And I have a question that I'd like to put to both of you concerning the 20-point plan, which is, what are you, and we'll start with Ghaith, what are you looking for? What are the questions in your mind that tell you whether or not, or to what degree, this plan is actually going to succeed? What should we be on alert to look for? Ghaith?
First of all, actually, I just want to echo something that Aaron said. Credit has to be given to the president and to this plan for ending the war. I don't believe we're going to go back to what we saw for the last 2 years, and that's no small matter. I mean, and I say this because, you know, this is almost the only good news I'm going to have. And the rest of it's going to go downhill from here. I'm very skeptical. I mean, to be honest, what I would be looking for, first and foremost, is, do I see any indications of ongoing, continued American focus to drive this process? And I say this because, frankly, I think as things stand today, Hamas wants the situation to freeze as it is now. They're in charge of 40-some% of Gaza, and they know no one's going to challenge them. I think Bibi is comfortable where things are right now because moving to phase two would require him to do things that will have a political cost for him. I think the Arab countries were comfortable with what we have right now because moving to phase two would require them to put some serious, not only financial, but also personnel. So all of this to say, unless I see serious American ongoing engagement, I don't see any serious in that. How will I see this? Well, how would I judge this? I would judge this maybe with one of three metrics. One would be, do I see an American address dedicated for dealing with this? I.e., Steve Witkoff did a great job getting this deal, but now Steve Witkoff is jumping between Russia and maybe if we have Iran again, and who knows with Venezuela. So will we see someone other? Alternatively, will we see this board of peace being constituted with a strong leadership to follow the day-to-day stuff and see what we see with this international security force? If I don't see movement on any of these issues, then I will give all my thanks to the administration for ending the war. But I suspect that what we see today is what we're going to be seeing for the next foreseeable future.
Aaron Miller, same question.
Yeah, I mean, it's great being here with Ghaith because he cuts right to the core of the issue. You know, three questions: who or what is going to govern Gaza? The plan, I don't think, has the elements that are required to answer that question. Second question: who or what is going to provide security for Gaza in all of its many manifestations? There is a plan for an international stabilization force, but I'd only point out in Northern Ireland, the decommissioning, demilitarization process started in 1998. It didn't end until 2005. And power sharing was offered to the IRA and to the Ulster Brigades as an incentive. Here, the incentive, Hamas understands decommissioning and demilitarization is an effort to put Hamas out of business. So I don't think the international stabilization force with Arab and Muslim boots on the ground is going to work. I can't imagine the Azeris, the Indonesians, who else would deploy with Hamas still armed and the Israelis and Hamas still in a confrontation. They're not going to kill Palestinians. Muslim and Arab peacekeepers are not going to kill Palestinians, and they are not going to hold Israel's coat while Israel kills Palestinians. And finally, who's going to pay for the reconstruction of Gaza? Who's going to clear the 60 billion tons of rubble? There is no indication in my mind that the international community, key Arab states, or the Trump administration is any closer to answering any of these questions.
Here's a question from someone who's been watching and listening, Mark Hoffman, who asks, should Israel trust either Qatar or Turkey in post-war policing of Gaza? You want to answer first, Aaron?
Look, the Israelis, because they now have escalation dominance, have a new definition of security. You see it in Lebanon, where they occupy the high ground in 5 sites. And they're basically using southern Lebanon as a laboratory to test their drone capacities. You see it in Syria, where they are deployed and have struck almost 90 times in the month of November. You see it in the West Bank, which is more heavily militarized now than at any point, probably since the Second Intifada. And you see it in Gaza, where they occupy 53% of the country. In the wake of October 7, the state of Israel is not going to trust anyone with their security, with its security. And you see that in the north of Israel, where the communities have not yet returned. Gaza enveloped communities are returning. But again, you've got the IDF in a buffer zone all along the border. So no, they're not going to trust the Qataris or the Turks. And the Turks, neither the Qataris or the Turks are going to put their boots on the ground.
Ghaith, should they trust such countries?
Actually, I mean, I would even widen your question and say, should the region go for this? And personally, I'm very, very skeptical, and I'm very uncomfortable. Why? Because Qatar and Turkey are countries that support Hamas. They go in, they will ultimately, they will not do it in a way that will, clash directly with Israel, and certainly not will do it that will clash directly with the United States, but they will work around the margins to create favorable conditions for Hamas. President Erdogan of Turkey talks about Hamas as freedom fighters, not as terrorists. Qatar uses its media and as well as diplomacy to project and support and amplify Hamas's messages. So no, the region should not, and the Israel should not. But that's only half of the answer. The other half, though, is frankly, if the region doesn't want Qatar and Turkey to play that role, they have to step up. Because today, frankly, the only countries that are coming and saying, look, we can deliver Gaza, we can deliver Hamas, we can deliver X, Y, and Z, are the Qataris and the Turks. And with a president, as Aaron said, who likes wins, they're coming to him and say, here, we're giving you a win. Let us take care of the problem. Unless the other Arab countries step up, then don't be surprised and don't complain that things are being shaped by the two countries that have Hamas and Islamist interest in mind.
Speaking of Donald Trump liking wins, here is a question for either one of you or both. Donald Trump publicly urged the president of Israel, Herzog, to pardon Bibi Netanyahu. Can you imagine President Herzog doing that? Aaron, you want to take that first?
Look, one of the great urban myths about the U.S.-Israeli relationship, I watched it and participated in it for several decades, is that we don't intervene in their politics and they don't intervene in ours. 3 American presidents have addressed the Knesset. Jimmy Carter in March of '79, Bill Clinton in October of '94, and George W. Bush in May of 2008. President Trump's speech to the Israeli Knesset and his turning to President Herzog and pushing for a pardon in the letter formally requesting the pardon suggests to me a sort of symbiotic relationship that now binds Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu cannot say no. President Herzog, I think, would like to put the trial and the indictments behind Israel. I think he believes somehow that has correctly believes that the indictments, the charges in the indictments, 2019, and a trial that's been ongoing for 5 years, which shows before 3 judges in a Jerusalem district court, which shows no signs of abating in terms of the number of witnesses and objections that the defense has on this. He'd like to put it behind him. At a minimum, he's going to ask for something in return. It's hard for me to believe that he would agree to a pre-conviction pardon. There's almost no precedent in Israeli political history or Israeli law. There is one precedent for a pre-conviction. In fact, it states very clearly on the pardon law that the president has the right to pardon offenders. Mm-hmm. Benjamin Netanyahu has not been convicted of anything. Now, if he were to admit his guilt, if he were to put a date on his exit from politics, I think if he were to say that the judicial reform effort, the effort to fire the attorney general, to emasculate the Supreme Court, to appoint his hand-picked people in positions, if he were to agree to any of that, yeah, you could cut a plea. It's a plea deal, basically, before a conviction or before a verdict. I just don't think he'd agree to it. So the answer is no. I don't think he'll be able to get a pardon from Herzog. Sorry.
That's all right. Ghaith. You said the long answer is no.
I agree with Aaron in the following sense. I think the Netanyahu trial is not about the Netanyahu trial. It's about all of these issues that Aaron talked about. Israel is in the midst of a number of almost, I would say, maybe not existential, but internal debates that will shape the nature of the state. This has been going on before October 7th. October 7th, maybe the war put a pause to it. But now we're back to some of these questions that Aaron mentioned. And I would add the question of the Haredi draft and all of these kind of things. This is not the kind of thing where, a foreign actor, no matter how relevant or strong or influential, like President Trump, can come and say, forget about this issue. And I think unless the Herzog's decision about the trial has answers to all of, or at least helps move all of these conversations towards resolution, I just don't see him doing this, because I think he knows that this kind of pardon will only deepen and inflame these internal Israeli rifts rather than actually move them towards resolution.
I want to ask you, and then if Aaron wants to comment as well, about the Palestinian Authority and what its capabilities are at this point. Can it be the institution that unites Palestinians once again and leads in Gaza?
Okay, I mean, let me start with the good news. And the good news is that the PA continues to function. It continues to provide services, health, education, etc. It continues to do security work, both in terms of law and order, but also in terms of security cooperation with the Israelis in the West Bank, etc. So I think all of these things are things which are worth noting, and particularly, frankly, worth noting because this is happening at a time when you have an Israeli government, at least certain ministers in the Israeli government, who want to collapse the PA. Look at what Smotrich is doing with the kind of financial relation between Israel and the PA. So that's kind of on the good news. However, today, in terms of capabilities, the PA's capabilities are designed to work in the West Bank, particularly when I talk about security. Gaza is an infinitely more complex landscape, and they require a major upgrade in terms of capabilities. But more important than capabilities is the question of credibility, because ultimately, whether it is counterinsurgency, whether it is governance, especially in these situations, has to be based on a credible government. And every security person knows this. And if you don't have the political legitimacy and credibility, your ability to do counter-terror, counterinsurgency is limited. Today, the Palestinian Authority lacks this. It lacks this for internal reasons: corruption, poor governance, Abbas being in government for since 05 or 06, I can't remember, all of these things that we know. And unless you have serious rehabilitation and reform of the PA, where the Palestinian public believe that their government is worthy of their respect, it will not be strong enough. But also, part of the problem is that today the Palestinians don't believe in the basic message of the PA, which is that diplomacy will produce results. Look, Hamas says violence, terror produces results. The PA says diplomacy produces results. Well, the PA's message right now is no longer credible. So unless we rehabilitate not only the PA as a governing body, but the very message that diplomacy can produce some goodies, it's very hard to see how we're going to move there. Now, to be clear, and I'll conclude with this, I'm not talking about a two-state solution tomorrow. That's a fantasy. That's not going to happen. But I'm talking about certain deliverables that will show that cooperation with Israelis, that non-violence actually will help advance Palestinian interests, maybe not to the ultimate point, but at least to a gradual point. Unless we do that, very hard to see how the PA can do that job.
And Aaron David Miller, thoughts on the Palestinian Authority?
I mean, I just would draw one central point, and that is this. Whether or not a two-state solution is possible or not, any end of conflict arrangement between Israelis and Palestinians requires that both sides have what I would describe to you as a monopoly over the forces of violence within their society. Israelis have to control their renegade settlers, would have to. And the Palestinians' national movement would have to essentially reach a point that it had reached under Arafat, but Arafat deployed violence when it suited him and controlled it when it didn't. I'm not an Israeli, and I don't play one on television. But if I were an Israeli, I would demand that any concessions I made on a permanent resolution of the conflict, borders, security, Jerusalem, refugees, end of all conflict and claims, be met with a partner that controlled all of the guns of Palestine. If you cannot control all of the guns of Palestine, I'm not talking about a lone gunman or even a extremist group, but you have basically two constitutions, two sort of statelets, two security forces in the Palestinian Authority controlled by Fatah and Hamas, which is seeking to increase its influence on the West Bank and may well do so. I don't see how you get around that problem. Monopoly over the forces of violence within Palestinian society. You need it. And we're not going to get anywhere near any end of conflict arrangement without it.
Actually, if I may just add a
Please,
point here to what Aaron said. I mean, and I have to fully agree with this. I mean, first of all, you look at the region. The successful states in the region are the states that settled the issue of monopoly on the use of violence early on, whether it's Israel in the Al-Talena case, and again, the Rabin, since we're talking about here about Rabin, he was the commander who did that, Jordanians and others.
This is when David Ben-Gurion stares down the revisionist movement of Menachem Begin, and actually fires on a ship with Israelis on it, insisting that the state will control. It will have a monopoly of violence, as you would say.
And the Jordanians did it in the 1920s. And the countries that failed to do that, think of Lebanon, think of Iraq, are failed states. And today it's not only the Israelis who worry about a failed Palestinian state. The Jordanians worry about it. The Egyptians worry about it, and further on. So I have to, again, emphasize the point that Aaron made. If there is no monopoly on violence, it's not only going to be Israeli opposition to a Palestinian state, it's going to be also Arab opposition to Palestinian state.
Here's a question from an anonymous attendee. It says, who do you think the Israeli people would be inclined to elect if the election were held today? I don't know.
I will not answer this because one thing that you learn in this business, if you predict Israeli politics, you will get it wrong. We sometimes think we understand Israeli politics because at the surface level, it looks like a typical European parliamentary system. Yeah. It's way more complex, and I personally don't feel that I've ever gotten the undercurrents right in that country.
I would make a broader point that even before October 7, Israel was a center-right country. The Likud is the most coherent, cohesive political movement in Israel today. And just to put a fine point on it, the history of peacemaking in Israel is not a history of the left or even the center left. It is a monopoly on the right. Either Menachem Begin, who traded Sinai to keep control over the greater prize, which was Jerusalem or the West Bank. Yitzhak Rabin, blessed be his memory, who was the breaker of bones in the first Intifada. Ariel Sharon, the architect of the settlement enterprise, was able to push Israeli settlers, 8,000 of them, out of Gaza. It is the right of center in Israel, the hard men who have been able to make these decisions. And I see zero indication that the next government, even if Dennis is right, that you could get a new government, but the same prime minister, or you could get a different government headed by a right of center Israeli politician. Naftali Bennett might be one of the aspirants.
Naftali Bennett, who did lead a government, one of the anyone but Bibi government.
Yes, the ABB government, correct.
Anyone but Bibi. Aaron David Miller and Ghaith Al-Omari, thank you very much for this. It hasn't been the most encouraging hour we've done in this series of panels, but that's that's not our responsibility to try to.
Thank you, Robert. The panelists are only as good as the moderator, and I'll say it again for the 15,000th time. You are
Okay.
an exceptional, extraordinary moderator with an exceptional voice.
Once again, I agree with David, with Aaron.
Okay, Aaron and Ghaith, thank you very much, and thanks as well to our first panelist, Ambassador Dennis Ross, who could not join us for the balance of the program. Many thanks to Joshua Plout and Ronnie Giuliano from American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, which produces Global Connections, and also thanks to our technical director, Bobby Grandone. Our program sponsor is the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center. It's a 501c3 national charitable organization. It represents, in the United States, Israel's largest hospital, Rabin Medical Center, in Petach Tikva. It's in Greater Tel Aviv. We hope that you'll consider a donation to AFRMC's Emergency Medical Relief Fund for Rabin Medical Center's rehabilitation clinic as it treats wounded soldiers and also wounded released hostages. You can donate online at www.afrmc.org. Join us for our next program in January, Medical Innovations and Artificial Intelligence. I'm Robert Siegel, and this has been Global Connections, Navigating the New Normal. See you next month. Stay healthy and stay safe.